This is Bumping Into, where we have interesting conversations with people from all walks of life.
Hello, music enthusiasts from around the world. Welcome to another episode of Bumping Into. I am your host, Francis Populin, and today we are talking with world-renowned guitarist David Grissom. Regular listeners will know that this is part of the Bumping Into That Sound series of shows. Those that don't know what I'm talking about, Bumping Into That Sound is basically a selection of episodes that focus around musicians, their inspirations, their origin story, their sound, their equipment, and what they're currently up to. When I was putting together the idea of doing this series, there was a handful of musicians that made themselves instantly available. And they did so without the safety net of hearing anything prior. One of those people that was kind enough was David Grissom, not only a true professional of the music industry and highly regarded guitarist, but one of the genuinely nice people of the industry. David has an impressive body of work, also as a solo artist, but he is also very well known for his time as John Mellencamp's lead guitarist and then his work with the Dixie Chicks. Famous for his warm Texas style of blues rock sound, he is a master of his craft. So much so that in conjunction with PRS, he has a signature guitar and amplifier range. This is David's story about his inspirations, how he got the gig with Mellencamp, and all things equipment. I hope you enjoy the show. David, how you going?
Good. How you doing, man?
Yeah, I'm really good, really good. Thank you very much for your time.
Sure, man. Pleasure.
What I would love to do, go into basically how did you start just before you started, your influences, and then coming onto the scene, and then go into a couple of albums where I think really define your sound, and then talk about the equipment that I suppose makes up the core part of your signature sound.
Okay.
So if I can take you back pre, I suppose, professional top tier level. If we go back to when it all began, what was the starting people or moment for you as a guitar player?
As a guitar player, it was the Beatles, and specifically Revolver. My grandfather played drums a little bit, and I was sort of thinking I was going to be Ringo, and then I heard Revolver, and I wanted to be George, and so, you know. That's kind of the big moment that jumps out at me, but really I fell asleep every night with a little AM radio next to my bed, so I was listening to Top 40, which when I was a young kid was just all over the map, all different kinds of stuff, pop music of the time, which was really, at least in where I grew up in Kentucky, was quite varied, and the genre, it wasn't really shoved into this pipe of stylistic criteria as it is now. It was kind of all over the map, but a lot of interesting chords and melody that caught my ear early on, and so that was really that was the jump start. I think was hearing Revolver.
And do you remember, as I suppose like all kids, you would have got your first guitar and then started playing, and do you remember the point in time where you thought, I've made it. This is it now. We've gone from wanting it to becoming it. You've entered that top tier professional grade.
Well, I'm trying to enter a top tier. The varsity, the ceiling keeps getting higher. I don't know. I mean, there was all these little signposts along the way. Jamming with friends, for instance, and like sort of like riding a bike, when the first day that you get up on the bike, you don't know how it happened, but it just happened. And I would have these moments of playing with other people when we would be playing like an Allman Brothers song, and I was really improvising, or I was really playing. There was, so there were things all along the way like that where it was like, I never really thought I would do anything else. I would
Wow.
preface all this by that. For some reason, at an early age, I thought I had the sense that this was absolutely what I wanted to do, music. And there was something about it, which I was incapable of really articulating at the time. But I took lessons from different people. And I know that the first two guys were like, pretty quickly, like, you need to now go take lessons with this guy. And the next guy was like, now you need to go take lessons with him. So I figured, well, maybe I'm doing something right, because they're sending me to these increasingly difficult teachers, like from just basic Stones and House of the Rising Sun to a big blues phase, then into jazz and listening to Wes Montgomery and Coltrane and all those guys, and learning something about that style of music. So there was a sense that I was progressing.
Yeah.
I will say that there was one moment that was really pivotal, or that sticks with me, that I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, and there's a not that well known but very influential jazz guitar player named Jimmy Rainey, who he played with Charlie Parker. I mean, he was like the first guitar player to play with Charlie Parker. He was from Louisville, and my teacher at the time suggested I try to go take a lesson with him, and I went over to his house, and he was working on a book of solos, and I was like, I was probably a better jazz player then than I am now, but I was not really still very fluent. But sitting there with him, we played like 3 or 4 tunes, and it was like all of a sudden, it was like he transferred this sort of wisdom, Yoda energy into my body.
Wow.
And I was really playing. I mean, I was really playing the tunes. And at the end of the lesson, he was like, well, what do you think you're going to do? And I presumed he was talking about career-wise and everything. I said, well, I kind of like to, play guitar if I could make it, and he said, he looked me straight in the eye. He goes, you're going to make it.
Wow.
There's no doubt you're going to make it. And that was sort of this, there was a sincerity in the way he said it that made me, that just something sort of like the gears all sort of clicked into place at that time. And it was like, okay, I am going to make it, and I am going to do this. And,
Yeah. That's a special moment to have.
It was very, very, very cool. It was really cool.
Yeah, geez. I mean, the confidence that would bring, and the calmness as well, knowing it's what you wanted. You've been told by someone you admire that's where you're going. A lot of things would have lined up just in that small, brief conversation of those few words.
Yeah. I mean, and I certainly didn't go, I didn't, I'm not a jazz guitar player. I'm a huge jazz listener and a fan of the music, and I incorporate a lot of that, elements of it in my playing. So it wasn't like, it was coming from, I mean, at the time, to paraphrase or quote Tom Petty, the future was wide open, and it was really, I was listening to any and all music I could get my hands on. It's, so it was really cool coming from him, but it is ironic, because that's not really the path that I took. But I maybe he heard something or felt something, and that was what he was referring to.
Wow. The is there, for yourself and your work, is there an album or a series of songs that you would say define you and your sound best? If someone was to say to you, well, what do you do? What is it that's your brand? You'd say, oh, it's this album or this song. Is I know as people get older and they get more experience and they start branching out and doing a lot more, that probably gets harder to put a category on. But is there something you feel that defines your classic signature sound best that you've recorded?
Well, that's very difficult to answer. I mean, because to me, there's sort of my life as a guitar player, solo artist, and songwriter. And, I put out 5 CDs on my own. So I would point to those CDs as like, that's kind of like what I do when I do my thing.
Yeah.
But the bulk of my life, probably, in the word career makes it sound like it's more of a business than it is. I don't know. But has been backing up other artists. And I've been really, really, really fortunate to play with a lot of great songwriters. And I pride myself in playing in that context, which is not, it's not about me and my soloing and putting my stamp on it. It's playing for the song. So I would point to, certainly the years that I learned so much about music were with Joe Ely, and there's a live record we did called Live at Liberty Lunch, which I think is a good representation. And certainly I was a lot younger and I played a lot faster and more ahead of the beat then. But then I would jump to the future and say, like, the newest James McMurtry record, I played most of the guitar on that. And it's just, for me, I'm a songwriter too, but when I'm in the sideman role, to play on songs that have that depth and weight, make it that much more special. I mean, when I'm asked to contribute to a record or a project like that with a songwriter who I have the utmost respect for, and the canvas is pretty empty, basically wide open, I really, really, really enjoy that. And I think that has been something I've been lucky to find myself in those situations a lot over the years. And so there's sort of that's sort of like another little slot, backing up people and supporting people that I'm very proud of. And I think there's an art to it, and I've studied and admire. And so most of my favorite guitar players are not the flashiest guys. It's the guys that can come up with cool parts and arrange guitar, layer guitar parts, and just play the right thing. Even if it's just like one note. That to me there's an art and a beauty and simplicity and Zen thing that I value just as much as, and I enjoy just as much as I do listening to the Allman Brothers at Fillmore East, or, any number of classic records based around improvising.
So if we, for me, I'd take you back to 1992, and that's how I discovered yourself, was on Mellencamp's Whenever We Wanted album. And at the time I was 12 years old, that album came out, and it just grabbed me straight away, because that sound on that album was so, I really don't know how to put it into a singular word, because it was very, it was just a classic, pure hard rock sound. What I find can happen is when you get guys that are pop or soft rock and they try to do a harder rock sound, it sounds like they're imitating something. That album didn't have that. To me, that album was what got me interested in the guitar. It was just warm. It was grunty. It had everything going for it. It was in your face, but it was balanced. A massively underrated album, I think, too, especially, and it's aged incredibly well. Even now, when you listen to it, it still sounds very, very fresh and tight. But that was my discovery of yourself. And back then, all you had was opening up the CD cover, looking at who was playing the guitar, and if that guy's CDs weren't in the music shop, that was it. That's as far as you could push that train back then, whereas opposed to now, it's, you've got an abundance of access to information and content. How did that aspect come about? How did you jump on board for that album?
Oh man, I spent a lot of time in Indiana after I finished high school, several years, and I played in a band with Kenny Aronoff, who was John's drummer for years. And so, and I knew John. I was in Bloomington where they all lived, and I worked at a record store, and John would come in and buy stuff. So I kind of knew him from that, but he was not like, "Hey, how you doing?" It was really standoffish sort of vibe. But so when they were working on the record before that, it was called Big Daddy, and that record started earlier than it was supposed to, and one of John's guitar players, Larry Crane, was not available. So they called me up out of the blue. I jumped on a plane and flew up there and did 4 songs with them. And it went well, I guess, because 6 months later, I guess Larry left the band, and they just called me and said, "Hey, do you want to be in the band?" And
Wow.
I said, "Yes, I want to be in the band." And that John had made a lot of records with, Lonesome Jubilee, which is, I think, maybe his best record.
Yeah.
Was before Big Daddy. In all those records, Scarecrow, they had this massive drum sound.
Yes. Yep.
And it's the sound of the room at his studio. And Kenny, the way Kenny can actually play to the room. He can create, a great drummer, you could put one microphone up. And Ringo, for instance, Chris Layton, who I have played with a lot, put one microphone over the drum set. He plays so balanced, but like
right.
Kenny could play the drums to sound the best in that room. And so the records were really built around that huge drum sound. Well, John decided he wanted to totally shift gears on the next one, which was Whenever We Wanted. Yep. And he said, the drums are going in the little room and the guitar amps are coming out into the big room. So John knew going in that he wanted to make a different sounding record. And I think I was the new guy, and that was going to be a big part of that sound, because I had come from playing with Joe Ely. It was, it's a really aggressive, rocking thing. So in a way, I guess to a certain extent, I was sort of the new toy, the new guy in the band. And the songs just, nobody said, "Hey, we're going to make a harder rocking record." I mean, that never came up. It was just like John would bring the songs in with an acoustic guitar and we would all respond to that. And I think me being in the equation obviously took him. Larry Crane, who was my predecessor, is one of the greatest rhythm guitar players. Talk about someone who's underrated. He was so pivotal in the sound of those records. So when he was not there, there was kind of this void that I kind of just like a bull in a china shop came in, and it was a more aggressive sound, and I was John encouraged it. Once it got going, he was all for it, and he's incredibly intuitive and incredibly smart and creative in the studio. It was the best thing I took away from my 3 solid years of working with him and doing 3 records was the way he worked in the studio. And so that's a long-winded answer to say that really that's how that came about. It was just sort of this John's vision of a bigger guitar sound, move the drums into this room. That's going to change everything right off the bat. Yeah. And, there's not much acoustic guitar on that record. It's pretty electric.
No, well, and that I wanted to, as one part of I suppose talking about equipment, was how you got that sound for that. Because I also as a kid went to the live show that you guys did in Melbourne in '92.
Oh yeah.
As well. So I went to that concert as a kid as well. But that right from the first track, those guitars just come in and it's such a bulletproof sound. It's such a great sound. So what was the I suppose the core that around getting the sound that you had on that album in terms of equipment?
It was probably on that record, probably 85% PRS and an old Marshall amp.
Wow. And it's just straight in and turned up.
Straight in and turned up. Yeah, absolutely. And at one point, John actually wanted more distortion. And so I was just really not a pedal guy at the time. I mean, I use a lot of pedals now, but back then I used like a TC Electronics booster and maybe a touch of delay, but not on the records. I would just go straight in. And so we actually I was friends with the guys at Marshall, and they had a newer amp that was a little higher gain. And we got one of those for a while, which we used on something. like maybe the solo on a song called Melting Pot or something.
Yeah.
It kind of feeds back more. I think that might have been that amp. I can't remember, but it was like I have this 50 watt that I used on even the clean stuff. You just turn them down and have the greatest clean sound, and then turn them up to about 6 and take a PRS and hit them like I hit them. And they'll crunch just, it's like really the settings that I use are quite different than what a lot of people think the Marshall thing is when, like a lot of people use a Marshall and they think, well, you just turn everything up to 10
Yeah.
and go. And it's a mess. To me, the way I play, it's a mess that way. So I'm like every tone control is on about 4 and the volume's on 6. And this is an old vintage Marshall where you don't need to bridge the channel, so it doesn't have the bright cap on the first channel. And that's kind of what I can take every vintage Marshall sounds different, but that's my starting point, and it's a very, very usable point of reference. There are other guys that turn everything up to 10 and turn the bass off, and it makes it work fine for them. But I felt somewhat vindicated when I saw the rig rundown for AC/DC, and they showed Malcolm's amp Marshall settings, and they were exactly what I just described.
Oh, wow.
They were like almost exactly what, and so it's that setting where when you play soft, the guitar is clean, or if you turn down to 8 or 7, you have a beautiful clean sound. If you turn all the way up and hit it really hard, it crunches. And so it's just that really sweet spot of, to me, the two things that make it less fun to play are too much gain and compression, or not enough gain and compression. So for instance, like a twin reverb, that's a very difficult amp for me to function with. I have to use a pedal to get it to do something for what I do.
Yep.
If I want it like strictly a super clean part, it's fine. But overall, it's really my thing really has not changed much. The whole philosophy and the approach has not changed much since those days with Ely and into Mellencamp and then in Storyville. Now I use a lower wattage amp that I helped design myself, but it does the same thing. It really is designed to do the same thing at a little lower volume. And
which is key, because there's so many people sitting at home wanting to get that sound.
Right.
And it's so hard to do when you've got, JCM 800 Marshall stack standing behind you, and you just can't get that feeling unless the thing's rattling the windows out of the frames. Yeah.
Well, it's still, it's 30 watts and it's plenty loud, but it's a good loud. And, it's fun, to me, guitar lives in the mid range. And so we all want, for years and years and years, I just wanted like tons of bottom end and this huge thing, which is when you're in a 3-piece band or you're doing a live gig can be one thing, but like having done so many sessions, you realize pretty quickly that you can't eat up that much space. And so this amp I'm playing now is a little more mid. It's not high mids. It's not like the harsh nasally mid frequency. It's kind of like what a great old box AC30, that sort of mid range without they can be really bright too, but it's not like that. The top end is super smooth, and we have all sorts of ways to sort of chill out the top end. And so it's somewhere between like a great old AC30 and a Plexi 50. That's sort of where that amp lives.
And how different, one of my favorite albums is the Way Down Deep album of yours. How different was the setup on that album as opposed to Whenever We Want It? Because it is a similar sound.
It's very similar. That's the PRS amp by and large. And I recorded all that at my house, that whole record.
Wow.
And mixed that record myself, for better or for worse. I recorded the whole thing in my house.
Oh, that's a great album. It's a top ranking album in my view. So there's certainly nothing lacking in how it came together.
That's my favorite sounding record. I could go into all sorts of reasons why I think that happened. One of which is the drummer, J.J. Johnson, his sound is just, I don't know. I mean, miking drums is really hard to do right. But if you have a great drummer that has a great sound, and I had a cool little room to put the drums in, and it all worked. And then, I don't know, I wrote some songs I liked that sort of fit together in this little 5-6 song. It's more like an EP. But I got this guitar sound on Way Down Deep. And once I got that sound, that was sort of the whole record. The whole record kind of wrote itself after I found that sound, which is not, like you say, it's not dramatically different than things I'd done in the past, but the way the guitar responded to the amp, and it's a little more gain without being like distorted. It's hard to describe.
It is hard to describe, and that's exactly what I was going to say to you.
Yeah.
Is it's like, as a player, you're always, I wish I had a bit more gain, and you put it up and then you go, that's really now too heavy. So you bring it back and you're looking for this perfect, because just enough gain warms the space and too little sounds a bit hollow. And it's almost like whatever you did and what you do, and especially with your own amplifier, is you've nailed that perfect, that balance. Just, it's like the stars lined up, and there's a lot of gain, but not too much. And it just has this beautiful, warm, full, it's very, very, it's soft, but it's edgy. It's just got everything going on. It really all came together. Well, it does come together, because that for me is your sound.
Yeah, it did come together. And, again, it's only 30 watts, but I run the master all the way up.
Yeah.
And I really feel like the output stage distortion is a big part of that whole thing we're talking about. It's like, the old Marshalls or in Voxes without master volumes or tweed amps, that when you turn the amp up, you're getting the tubes to do their thing. It's not the tubes, it's the power tubes. And so I run mine on the master on 10 all the time. And it's still plenty loud. It's not like my amp's not loud enough, but I play almost every Tuesday night when I'm in Austin at a small club. And when I'm up there playing chords, tuning up and checking my sound, I'm going like, this is so loud. How this is going to kill people. But I always look down in the front, and nobody's like going like this, or it's mouthing, it's too loud. It's just the right top end.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, that's where the problems develop, is when it's that piercing trebly.
Yeah, that's hard on the ears. But
it's hard on the ears.
Bottom end, it sounds nice being loud, and it's not too invasive. You actually enjoy it and you crave it.
Yeah. And there's varying flavors of it. You can get. I've got some old Marshalls that I love that have the same lack of piercing things, but they have a different top end than. And I think it's with the power tubes that are in the amp, because that's really what you're hearing is the transformers and the power tubes in a simpler circuit like that. And I like mixing that up on records. And on Way Down Deep, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I did use a high watt a fair amount on that record too. There are a lot of doubled parts, and I would use the PRS on one side and the high watt on the other. But again, on the high watt, it's a really bright amp. So I'm in the normal channel, and I've got the presence and the treble like way down.
Yeah. But
another key thing is the speakers that you're playing through. And I've used, for the PRS stuff, it was pretty much my old Marshall cabinet with 25s. With thick basket weave grill cloth, and then the fanes for the high watt are a big part of that sound, and they just chill the top end out. And so for new speakers, I'm really kind of always looking for something that will mimic that top end response, but be a little bit more robust for live playing, because even with a 30-watt amp, I generally blow one speaker a year. Like I get a new cabinet every year, because at the end of the year, at least one of the speakers needs to be replaced. And so if that one is if that one is at that point, I figured the other one is close to it. So I just, it's a
serviceable item, I guess.
it's a
take it.
serviceable item. You can change the speakers or just get another cabinet or whatever. But I mean, so again, at 30 watts, it's really been a revelation for me, because I've played next to a lot of guys in the last few years that are using like 100-watt 2 rocks and things like that. And I'm still the loudest guy at all times. And it's the way I play. I think, a lot of great guitar players have a very gentle touch. And even when they get aggressive, it's not like,
Yeah, I
it's
agree.
like, I kind of came from the Pete Townsend, early Billy Gibbons, really aggressive. That comes through the amplifier.
Yeah.
And there are certain Albert Collins. You can't get Albert Collins' tone or Albert King without popping the strings and hitting it with authority. And
and it's funny that, because you are right. And I've seen guitarists that are technically brilliant, but you ask them to play something that's like a hard rock blues type sound, and it sounds a bit synthetic because it's almost too perfect. It doesn't have that aggression that comes through the strings that you feel coming out of the amplifier.
Yeah. Yeah. And, Jeff Beck, I saw him the other night, and he's like the best I've ever seen him. And he was just, it was so righteous. He was so amazingly good. I've seen him 15 times, and I think the other night was the best I've ever seen him. And so that it was bone chilling, really. It was like, but having said all that, it's all that spectrum of the dynamic range is, to me, really, it needs to be balanced out by the other end of the dynamic range too. And that's something that I feel is really the balance. So that when you do play aggressive or loud or dig in, it means something. If you do it all night long, it's just kind of like, but after the fifth or sixth song, you've heard everything.
Yeah.
And, there are many, many, many guitar players and musicians who I greatly admire and love to go hear play, who play with a very restrained attack and touch. And I think there's beauty at both ends of that spectrum.
Yeah. If we come into so you've got your own amplifier that you obviously designed, and that's going to be very hard, I suppose, like you were saying, if you've got a Marshall, that can be a bit top heavy, and, some of the Fenders don't have what the Marshall has, and what you've created is what suits you best. And it's obviously a huge part of your sound. So item number one for yourself would be your own amplifier. That's key to getting that sound. But then if we talk about because you've also developed your own pickups, is that right?
Yeah, for the PRS, the guitar, yeah, we did. We spent over a year developing those pickups.
Wow. So if we go into a comparative term, a lot of guys that are playing would just pick up an old, if an imitation Les Paul or some old Strat and bang a set of humbuckers in it to try and get that rockier sound. So how different did you find that pickup that you've created? How much did that change as opposed to, say, like the 498 Gibson pickup, or a more just a standard off the shelf pickup? Is there a big difference?
Well, you mean from the other PRS pickups?
No. So, if we just talk of because I suppose PRSs, I sort of see that as more a very very high end, beautifully crafted guitar, as opposed to what is more available off the shelf. So normally guys would grab something old and throw a set of Gibson pickups in it, or even a Seymour Duncan JB pickup.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's see. I guess at the end of the day, my goal was to try to get a sound that was similar to my 59 335, which is, I've played, and I've owned a few PAF guitars and played a lot of them. And to me, the 59 335 that I have is sort of in this sweet spot of like every guitar that had PAF pickups in it sounds different to me. So the range of those pickups, and then the patent number pickups in the early 60s, which are really not that much different except for the magnet length, apparently. I don't know all the particulars. I wasn't trying to recreate that guitar, but there's a sonic, again, the mid-range, where the mid-range lived, how much mid-range there was, but the clarity on the bottom end and the smoothness on the top. So it was like all those things
Yep.
Were kind of what we were going for, but the guitar itself is not a 335. And I think really a lot of times people underestimate the acoustic properties of an electric guitar.
Right.
If the guitar itself doesn't sound good, no great pickup is going to make it sound great.
Yeah.
And so, there was a lot of time, and I'd had a lot of experience with Paul's guitars, and we made some changes, several minor changes that really added up to me to be a big step in the direction I was looking for sonically and feel wise. So most, 99, or, I don't know, all the ones that I play have a great tone, springy, lively sound to begin with. And so the pickup is like, what microphone you put in front of a singer. Like,
right. Okay.
The singer's not a great singer. You're not going to, you can only do so much.
Yep.
And so my friend here, Ed Reynolds, built a test guitar where you could you get 10 pickups and you put them in these little jigs, and they would slide into the top of the test guitar, and the wiring had alligator clips. It went to terminals on top of the guitar. So you could change a set of pickups in about a minute and a half max.
Wow.
So in the past, every time I tried to A/B pickups, you're talking about taking the strings off,
Yeah.
unsoldering everything. And by the time you get the next set in, you've really forgotten.
Yeah.
And this was like, slide 2 pickups out, undo the alligator clips, slide 2 in, hook them back up, and there we are again. And I could go back and forth, and we would just sit there for, not that long, and because your ears will get fatigued.
Yeah.
Or you'll start thinking you're hearing things that really aren't there. And we had probably 15 sets of pickups from various manufacturers that we were like testing what we were doing, against, to see how they held up and where were they in terms of frequency response, volume, gain, output, and started working with Paul. Hey, Paul, we love this A3 bar magnet. Can you send us one with another 100 turns on the slug side? I mean, it was like, every little thing mattered.
Wow.
And just kind of got it to where when I would A/B it against all these other pickups, that felt, the ones we ended up with felt right. And again, though, guitar to guitar, there is a different sound, and I don't think it's the pickups, it's the wood and the way the neck marries with the body. And you say, well, they'd be great if they all sounded the same. Well, to me, that's boring. It's like some of the beauty of organic materials is that they, is that variance. And so if you have the opportunity to play more than one or whatever, you can sort of bond. You will find that you maybe bond with that one. But man, when I go do a clinic for PRS or show up at a place, I don't bring a guitar. I mean, I play whatever's there, whatever DGT they have there, and I'm cool with it. It's always fine. They're really consistent. So,
pedal wise, is there anything that makes up your permanent fixture of having a couple of pedals in front of the amp?
I mean, I've for studio stuff, I have, something that I could take a nap on because you have to have 1,000 different sounds at the touch of a button. But man, when I play live, it's 4 pedals, and so I go into like a jetter overdrive pedal that I sort of had a little bit of input on, and then into an exotic effects EP booster. Very important fact about that pedal for me is to go inside the pedal and put the dip switch. There's like 3 or 4 dip switches, and I'm not sure they're still calling it vintage mode, but it's the setting that will roll off a little bit of top end when it's engaged.
Oh, right. Okay.
And if you leave it as is, that pedal it will brighten up things like an Equiplex preamp will sometimes do, depending on the condition of the Equiplex in the era. But for me, again, if I'm using it as a boost and I want to hit the front end of the amp harder for solos, I don't want to add top.
Yeah.
I'd rather have the top I'd rather have a little more articulation in my rhythm parts. And then when I take a solo, I would rather I want to hit the front end of the amp harder and not introduce more high-end information. So it's the overdrive, then the booster, and then I've got an old Arion chorus pedal that I use for like this sort of fake Leslie sound. It's kind of like a Leslie, but not, and I like that it's not exactly like a Leslie.
Okay.
And from there into a Strymon El Capistan delay pedal. So that's my small travel board and my local around town board. It's just overdrive, boost, modulation, delay, and tuner.
And a lot of talent standing in front of the stage that obviously is it makes it, no matter how much equipment you put behind you, it a lot of people take the slow road to learning that there's a hard process in getting the talent as well.
Yeah, and the often overlooked factor is that I find, I don't know how else to say it except that you have to make the sound with your hands.
Yeah.
You have to create the sound you want to hear. I mean, if I had a guitar in my hand, and I could give you some examples, but when I do a clinic, I walk around the room with my electric guitar unplugged so that people can hear that it really sounds exactly like it sounds when it comes out of the amplifier.
Right.
And it goes back to what we were talking about before, Albert Collins, Pat Metheny, Wes Montgomery, Albert King. It's the way they're touching the strings and the pressure and the angle of the pick, or if they're using their fingers, or, it's all those things. You have to make the sound, and then pedals just enhance that.
Yeah.
But to think that you could just go buy 40 pedals and play like, with this like a, perfect posture with your thumb behind the neck and a nice even alternate picking thing that a lot of people emphasize and tell you to practice, which I have nothing against whatsoever. But that, it sort of, to me, is a little bit like talking to you like this with the same tone of voice. And
it's a bit soulless.
Well, there are guys that do it. I mean, that aren't soulless at all. I'm trying to think who that would be, but even like I was going to say Pat Martino. He plays all those even eighth notes but even he does these dynamic things that when they happen, it's like, oh man, it's so effective and everything. But he's like a guy to me that has just a master of up to alternate picking and even eighth note lines or 16th note lines and everything like that. But there's not many Pat Martinos.
Yeah.
Dynamics are your friend. And, but again, going back to the main thing, the main point I was trying to make is that if you don't make the sound with your hand, it's not going to come out of the amplifier.
Practice makes perfect, doesn't it? I suppose it's one of those, you just got to master your craft without anything else in front of it, and just get better and better.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot of it is going to, for me, it was just to going out to hear other guitar players that I admired and watching them. And it became real apparent that, why they sounded the way they do by watching their hands. Yeah. And, Norman Blake's touch is dramatically different and not even remotely the same as Stevie Ray Vaughan, but they're both, to me, exceedingly musical and beautiful, and there's a lot to be learned from both, from all great players like that, just by watching their hands and their touch. It's not so much what pedals are on the board.
And string-wise, what gauge strings do you normally prefer?
Well, on my guitar, the PRS, normally I was using 11 to 49, but in the pandemic, I decided that I deserved a break. Today, I have gone to 10.5 to 48, I think. Oh, so it's slightly lighter. And then even on some of them, I do 10 to 46. The guitar will tell you what it wants. Like some of the guitars, the 10.5s feel exactly like 10s, and the 10s feel, and other ones, the 10s feel like 10.5. So it's kind of a guitar by guitar basis. On Fenders, I'm always 10 to 46. Gibson, kind of like the PRS. I mean, it's a shorter scale. So, I can throw 11s on it. It's not that big of a deal, but I kind of like the way 10s or 10.5 sound, and Gibson's a little better. And that's another thing is that, the size of your string will affect your tone, and bigger is not always better.
Yeah, well, it's definitely harder work.
Harder work, but you get better tuning stability.
Yeah.
And for certain styles, and certainly certain styles of rhythm playing, it's great. But I have a Gretsch that I keep flat wounds on that are like 12s to whatever, 56 or 54. I don't remember.
Yep.
And acoustic guitars, I go back and forth between 12s and 13s. Again, the guitar will tell you what it wants. Like the whole idea that mediums sound better on acoustic is not been my experience. Like there are guitars that are braced in a way that they sound better with 12s on. And like I have a Triple O Martin, which is a shorter scale guitar, and you think, well, you should probably put mediums on, but it sounds better with 12s. It just sounds better. And conversely, there are dreadnoughts that if you don't put mediums on them, they sound like terrible. They're braced and built for medium gauge strings. And so when you get the mediums on there, it's just like, oh my God, it's a cannon, And so it's really, for me, it's been experimenting with the guitars that I have to find what I like the best. And I may change my mind, from time to time.
And is there anything you're working on at the moment that's due for release or going to be released soon? Anything with your signature sound that we can keep an eye out for?
No, I do sessions here in my studio for people all the time, but there's very few full record projects happening for me as a sideman anymore. I produced a record for a guy named Mike Burris that came out 6 months ago. And so I got really nicely involved with that. And then a French artist came here who I worked with named Patrick Coutin. It just hasn't been a lot of full records. And in terms of my material, I write all the time, but the hardest thing for me is to get started on a record. And like I was talking before on Way Down Deep, when I got that guitar sound and came up with that riff for the title song, for some reason, then I was like, I made the record really fast.
Wow. So that first 5 minutes is the hardest part.
Well, I just like, all right, there's true north for this, right? That's the direction, that sound, that vibe. And once I had that, once you have a point on the horizon to aim for, it's a lot easier to get there than spinning around all the time. Like, is this going to be more of a singer-songwriter record, or am I going to do a bunch of guitar instrumentals? So it's it's really hard to decode the environment we're in right now. Like this, does it make more sense to put one song at a time out, or
It seems to be more flavor that way, isn't it? Like a lot
it
of
does?
bands are single or maybe like an EP, but it's not that classic bulk album every
Yeah,
few years.
yeah. And then you get into the economics of that. Like I now live in a much smaller place and I have a smaller space to work in where I can't record drums. So,
Oh,
it's a lot cheaper to go record 10 songs, take 2 days or 3 days and do 10 songs than if you're going to another studio for drums, then go cut one or two songs, go home, come back 2 months later and do one or two songs. I mean, it just, the logistics of that and the cost of that, it's, once you get set up, you can record a bunch of songs really pretty quickly if you have the right players.
yeah.
And so as we all are putting out our own records, self-funding, and that becomes a concern, consideration too.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, it would for sure. And
Yeah.
geographically, I mean, so America is obviously huge. The United States is a massive landmass. And is it a case of that there is no central point where, in Australia, for example, Melbourne would be the hub of the arts, really, be it music, be it TV, drama, anything. Melbourne is very much the center point for that, and Sydney's only an hour's flight from Melbourne, so it's no big deal. And you used to be able to get them for $75, so that was never an issue in the past. But with yourself, is there that thing of where because you're somewhat in the middle of the country, aren't you? So if you've got to go to the left or to the right to do something, that's obviously, or bring someone in to work with you, that's a big deal, isn't it?
Well, it's, if I have 10 songs together and there's a drummer in Nashville or a bass player in LA or whatever that I know I want to use because I think the two of them together would be this great combination, that's not a huge deal. Touring here is almost impossible until you get to a certain level of venue and and stature. I can't do it. I can't tour here without losing money. I did go to Europe this summer, to Italy.
Wow.
But I mean, like if you take a night off in Europe, it's like, it cost me €1,000, because you got to buy hotel rooms for everybody. So, I mean, the last longer tour I did over there, I think I did 35 shows in 37 days. And then you're just like praying you don't lose your voice. And,
so it's foot to the floor the whole time.
Foot to the floor the whole time, but the cities aren't as far apart. And in Europe, a hotel room comes with the gig. It's a really different, it adds up to quite a bit. In the States, the drives are, it's just like everything's spread out.
Yeah.
A lot more.
I was talking to one guy, an Australian artist, who tours a lot in Europe, and they've got a big following through France and the UK. And he said to me, the big thing he noticed is, he said, in Australia, you do a show, everyone just wants to come and see an hour, and that's it. You're done, you're finished, you move on. And he said, but when you go to Europe, if you walk off the stage after an hour, they're thinking, well, when are you coming back to finish the job?
Yeah, I mean, I've not done a show less than 90 minutes there on my own. If you're supporting somebody, it's going to be a shorter set. But in terms of on my own, 90 minutes is the norm.
Is there a difference in the music scene, if you were to say LA to New York to, where you are? Do you turn up and have to adjust to what is slightly different in those areas?
I think so. I don't think you have to, and I don't think, I mean, probably, I mean, any act that I know that tours constantly, like, someone, I don't think that people vary their shows really based on where they are. I think they do the people that I like and look up to, they're not going to say, oh, it's New York, we got to play quieter, or we got to, but there are, but as if you're just a club, if you're doing clubs, you do have to take into consideration that, like in Austin, we can play loud. I mean, I can go in and play loud and people don't really, that's just expected. But there are a lot of other parts of the country where it's like, if the sound man can hear you, you're too loud.
Oh, wow.
So, if you're playing theaters or up, you're free to kind of do your show. I mean, you're generally carrying front of house PA and everything like that. So I don't know why I keep coming back to, like, people like Jason Isbell, Lucinda Williams. They're not going to change their show.
Yep.
From New York to Jacksonville, Florida. They might add a song or take away a song, or they might have a special guest come and sit in, and that might be a different song. Or like in the case of Government Mule, one of the truly great bands touring all the time, they vary their set list from night to night, no matter where they are. And that's why people travel with them to go hear their shows, just to see what songs they're going to play. It's very Grateful Dead sort of
okay.
phenomenon.
And I'm guessing plans to come to Australia anytime soon for yourself?
No, I have nothing on the books unfortunately, I've been 4 or 5 times.
Oh,
and,
wow. Okay.
And
for touring, obviously, mostly for touring, or all for touring?
All for touring. The first time I came was my third gig with Joe Ely was in Adelaide.
Okay. Yeah.
We supported Jimmy Barnes.
Wow.
And I thought I died and gone to heaven, because we traveled with Jimmy and stayed in the same hotels he did. And I mean, it was so much fun. He was a gas, treated us great. And then I came back with Mellencamp, and we did, I think, just once. And then I went twice with the Dixie Chicks.
Oh, okay.
But I've always loved coming. And I guess the first trip was especially great because I was so young and it was such a new thing for me. And we went to Perth. And so just to sort of get the flavor of the, that 5-hour flight over to Perth, and feeling like I was sort of in this secret land over there. It was really special. And I love Australia.
And Jimmy Barnes, I guess you'd probably say, is seen as our Bruce Springsteen.
I guess so. Yeah. I didn't even know who he was until we went over, and he definitely kicked butt. And
he's still going too. He's still,
is he?
Yeah.
Well, he was a badass back then. I mean, he definitely left. He didn't leave anything on the stage, and so it was a great double bill with Joe Ely. And again, it was really, really great. It seemed like Australia then seemed like what I would picture Southern California was like in the 60s or something. It was very
okay.
The pace of everything was like free and easy, and everyone's so friendly. And
yeah, well, hopefully you get a chance to come back and do it all again.
Yeah, I hope so too. I've been lucky to go. Yeah, I think it was 4 trips.
Well, I can't thank you enough for your time. I appreciate all your time and your information. It's been fascinating to talk to you, and that insight, it's priceless. So I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me to talk with you.
Thanks for making it through to the end of the show. If you wanted to find out more about this episode, head to bumpinginto.com.au. Don't forget the .au, and find the episode page. There'll be some links and some more info about the guest and all of the topics and items that we spoke about. Feel free to have a look around and check out any other episodes while you're there. And if you think that someone else would enjoy what you have just listened to, please do feel free to hit the share button. Thank you again for having us in your ear space. I truly appreciate it, and I hope to catch you on the next one.